The young actor dropped to his knees in the middle of the take, and the way his hands were shaking had nothing to do with the script. Wait, because what nobody on that set knew was that the camera had been rolling for the past 11 minutes, and what John Wayne just said would either end a career or save one, depending on who you asked. 20 minutes earlier, the set had been ordinary enough. Pinnacle Pictures' Stage 7, built to look like a saloon straight out of Dodge City, smelled like sawdust and prop whiskey that morning in early June 1958. The painted backdrop showed a dusty street through fake windows, and the floorboards creaked authentically under boot heels. The air hung thick with cigarette smoke from the crew and the kind of nervous energy that comes when you're 3 days behind schedule and the studio's already sent 2 memos about budget overruns. John Wayne stood near the bar, adjusting his gun belt while the lighting crew repositioned 2 floods for the 14th time that hour. His costume that day was simple: brown leather vest over a cream-colored shirt, dark trousers, the gun belt worn low on his hip. He'd been in this business long enough to know when a day was going to go sideways, and this one had that feel from the moment he walked through the stage door. The scene itself wasn't complicated. Saloon fight, 3 punches, 1 chair breakaway, standard Western stuff. John's character walks in, sees trouble, handles it without breaking a sweat. They'd rehearsed it twice the day before, but the young actor playing the troublemaker, Tommy Brennan, 23 years old, 2 years in Hollywood, 3-bit parts to his name, had shown up that morning with something wrong in his eyes. Not drunk, not high, just somewhere else. Dark circles beneath them suggested he hadn't slept. John noticed it during the first blocking run, the way Tommy kept missing his marks by 2 feet, the way his right hand kept drifting to his jacket pocket like he was checking for something that wasn't there. The assistant director called for quiet. The slate clapped. John delivered his line and moved toward the bar. Tommy was supposed to turn, throw the first punch, miss by 6 inches. Instead, Tommy froze. His line died in his throat. The silence stretched for 3 seconds, then 5. Then John saw the director's hand start to rise for a cut, but John didn't stop. He kept moving, stayed in character, shifted his approach like he was reading a drunk instead of a frightened kid. He said Tommy's character's name, the fictional one from the script, and added a question that wasn't in the scene but fit the moment. Tommy's eyes snapped into focus. He threw the punch. They ran through the choreography. The scene played out. The director yelled cut, said it was good, called for 1 more take just to be safe. That's when Tommy's hands started shaking for real. Not the actor's tremor you fake for a scene, but the kind that comes from somewhere deeper. John saw it. 2 crew members saw it. Nobody said anything because you don't stop a shoot day for nerves, not when you're already behind. The assistant director called positions. John walked back to his mark. Tommy walked back to his. The camera rolled again. This time, Tommy didn't just freeze. He broke. 3 seconds into the scene, his face went white. His mouth opened, but nothing came out except a sound like air leaking from a tire. John stopped mid-stride. The director didn't call cut because he was watching a performance he didn't understand yet, something raw and unplanned that might actually play on screen. John took 2 steps closer to Tommy. The lights burned down on both of them. Tommy's right hand went to that jacket pocket again, pulled out a piece of paper, crumpled, shaking in his grip. Now, stop for a second and picture the set from above, because what you're about to see only makes sense when you know where everyone was standing. John and Tommy in the center, 8 feet apart, camera on the left, operator named Eddie Falco behind the viewfinder, director 20 feet back, next to the monitors, 12 crew members scattered around the edges, lighting guys, grips, script supervisor, makeup woman, and in the back corner, near the stage door, the studio's executive liaison, a man named Garrison who'd been standing there for 40 minutes without saying a word, holding a clipboard and watching everything like he was counting mistakes. Tommy tried to speak. His voice cracked. He said something about the paper in his hand, something about a letter, something John couldn't quite make out over the sound of the overhead lights humming. The director leaned forward, still not calling cut, because this was starting to look like something they could use, a breakdown that felt real. John looked at Tommy's face, looked at the paper, looked at the way the kid's knees were starting to buckle, and made a decision that had nothing to do with the scene and everything to do with what he recognized in another man's eyes. He broke character completely. Didn't ease out of it, didn't transition, just dropped the Western drawl and spoke in his actual voice, the one he used when the cameras were off and the room was serious. He said Tommy's real name. He said it twice. Tommy's eyes locked onto his. John took 1 more step forward, close enough now that the camera couldn't get both their faces in the same frame, and he started talking. Not loud, not performing, just talking the way you talk to someone when nobody else needs to hear it. Listen, because what John said in those next 30 seconds wasn't written down anywhere, wasn't captured clearly enough on the audio to make it into any official record, but the people who were standing close enough heard pieces of it, and those pieces got repeated in backlots and hotel bars for the next 20 years. He asked Tommy what the letter said. Tommy whispered something back. John asked him when he'd gotten it. Tommy said this morning. John asked him if anybody else knew. Tommy shook his head. John's jaw tightened. He looked past Tommy toward the stage door, toward Garrison with his clipboard, then back to Tommy's face, and that's when John said the thing that dropped Tommy to his knees. 4 words, spoken quietly, almost gently, but with the kind of weight that comes from a man who'd been in this business since before most of the crew was born, who'd seen every kind of pressure and threat and cheap play the studios could throw at a person. 4 words that made Tommy's legs give out, made his hands drop the crumpled letter, made him grab his own thighs just to have something solid to hold on to. The camera kept rolling. Eddie Falco kept his eye pressed to the viewfinder because he understood, in that instant, that he was documenting something real. The director's hand finally started to rise for a cut, then stopped halfway, uncertain. John knelt down, put himself at Tommy's level, right there on the saloon floor between the prop tables and the breakaway chairs. He kept talking, voice low, words measured. Tommy's breathing started to slow. His hand stopped shaking quite so badly. John said something else, longer this time, and Tommy nodded. Then John did something nobody expected. He looked directly at the camera. Not at Eddie, at the lens itself. Looked at it the way you look at a witness you're calling to account. Before we go on, you need to understand one thing about how John ran his sets. He didn't pull rank often, didn't throw his weight around just to prove he could, but when he did step in, people listened. Not because they feared him, but because he'd earned the kind of respect that comes from being reliable, professional, and fair. He showed up on time, knew his lines, hit his marks, treated the crew like people instead of furniture. And when something was wrong, genuinely wrong, not just inconvenient or expensive, he had a reputation for standing in the way until it got fixed. He stood up, helped Tommy to his feet. Tommy's face was still pale, but something had changed in his posture, some small shift from collapse toward stability. John turned toward the director and said they needed 10 minutes. The director opened his mouth to argue, caught the look on John's face, and changed his mind. He called for a break. The set exhaled. Crew members started moving toward the craft services table, the bathroom, anywhere that wasn't the center of whatever had just happened. But Eddie Falco didn't move. He stayed behind the camera, hand still on the body, eye still near the viewfinder, and he kept rolling. 11 minutes total from the moment Tommy had frozen until John walked him off the set toward the back hallway. 11 minutes of footage that wasn't in the shooting schedule, wasn't planned, wasn't supposed to exist. He did it because he'd been shooting film for 9 years and he knew the difference between a moment and a performance, and this was something else entirely. Garrison, the studio liaison, followed them. Stayed 15 feet back but followed nonetheless, clipboard still in hand. John noticed. He didn't acknowledge it, didn't turn around, just kept walking with Tommy until they reached a door marked Storage B and went inside. The door closed. Garrison stopped in the hallway, checked his watch, wrote something on his clipboard. Remember, you're trying to understand why this moment mattered, why it got talked about on sets for decades afterward, but you can't see it clearly without knowing what that letter said. Tommy never spoke publicly about it. John never confirmed the details, but 3 people who worked on that film, in separate conversations years later, all said versions of the same thing. The letter was from the studio. It wasn't a termination notice exactly, more of a suggestion, a strong suggestion that Tommy's contract wouldn't be renewed unless certain personal matters were handled more discreetly. The wording was careful, legal, the kind of threat that doesn't look like a threat on paper, but feels like one when you're 23 and everything you've worked for is hanging by a thread. John had seen letters like that before, had received one himself years earlier, when he was still John Morrison, and the studios were still figuring out how to turn a football player into a movie star. His had been about his politics, about who he was seen talking to at parties, about making sure his public image aligned with what the front office wanted. He'd crumpled that letter too, but he'd had more power then, more options. Tommy had neither. Inside the storage room, John and Tommy talked for 8 minutes. Nobody knows exactly what was said. but when they came out, Tommy was standing straighter. His hands had stopped shaking, his eyes had cleared. John walked him back toward the set, stopped at the edge of the lights, and said something that made Tommy laugh once, short and surprised. Then John clapped him on the shoulder and Tommy walked back to his mark like he was ready to work. Notice the shift here, because this is where the story stops being about one scared kid and starts being about how power actually works on a film set. John walked over to the director, spoke quietly for 30 seconds, then walked toward Garrison. The conversation was short. John's posture was relaxed, almost friendly, but his voice carried just enough that the nearest crew members heard him ask Garrison how long he'd been standing there. Garrison said all morning. John asked if he'd found anything worth reporting. Garrison looked at his clipboard, looked at John, said he was just observing. John said that was fine. Observing was part of his job, but maybe he could observe from outside the stage for the rest of the day since the lights and the activity seemed to be making him uncomfortable. Garrison opened his mouth. John waited. Garrison closed his mouth, turned, and left through the stage door. The crew pretended not to notice, but the script supervisor, a woman named Helen who'd worked with John on 4 previous films, wrote in her notes that day, "J.W. cleared the room, back to work. No details, no explanation, just that." The shorthand of someone who'd seen it before and knew exactly what it meant. They finished the scene on the next take. Tommy hit every mark, delivered every line, threw every punch exactly as choreographed. The difference in his performance was night and day. The director called print. They moved on to coverage. By lunch, the morning's disruption had started to fade into the background rhythm of the shoot day, just another near miss in a business full of them. But Eddie Falco had those 11 minutes on film. He logged them, labeled them, pickup, rehearsal, and stored them with the rest of the day's footage. The film came out 8 months later. Did well enough, not a blockbuster but solid, the kind of mid-budget western that kept studios in business. Tommy Brennan appeared in 6 more films over the next 3 years. Then he left Hollywood, moved to Oregon, taught high school drama for 30 years. In a 1987 interview with the local newspaper, he was asked about his time in the movies. He said he'd learned everything he needed to know about acting in a single morning, from a man who showed him that the most important performance isn't the one in front of the camera. John Wayne never mentioned it. In 20 years of interviews after that day, through dozens of conversations about his career and his craft, and the people he'd worked with, he never once brought up Tommy Brennan, or that morning on Stage 7, or what he'd said that made a young actor drop to his knees. But the crew members who'd been there that day, they talked. They told the story at rap parties and on other sets, and it became one of those pieces of Hollywood lore that gets passed around, details changing slightly with each telling, but the core staying the same. That John Wayne saw someone in trouble and stepped in, that he recognized a threat and neutralized it, that he used his power for something other than his own convenience. Eddie Falco kept those 11 minutes for 40 years. He died in 1998, and his estate donated his archive to a film preservation society. The footage is there, cataloged, labeled, available to researchers who know to look for it. It's silent. The audio from that day was recorded on a separate system and was either lost or never properly labeled, so you can see everything but hear nothing. You can watch John kneel down, you can watch Tommy's hands shake, you can watch John look at the camera, but you can't hear the 4 words that changed everything, the ones that dropped a young actor to his knees and in doing so helped him stand back up. Hold this moment in your mind, because when you think about what it means to have power in a room, to be the person, everyone's watching, to be the name on the poster and the face in the trailer, you have to consider what you do with it. John Wayne could have ignored Tommy's breakdown, could have called for the director to replace him, get someone who could handle the pressure, could have finished the day without getting involved in whatever personal drama was pulling a bit player apart at the seams. Nobody would have blamed him. It wasn't his job to save every scared kid who walked onto a set, but he did get involved, made it his business, took the 8 minutes in the political capital and the mild inconvenience of standing up to a studio observer who was just doing his job. And the reason that story survived, the reason it got repeated and remembered, isn't because John Wayne was a saint or a hero. It's because people recognize something true in it, that there are moments when the script stops mattering and you have to choose who you're going to be when nobody's giving you lines. That having power means nothing if you're not willing to spend it on something other than yourself. That the camera might be rolling, but the performance that counts is the one nobody paid to see. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you'd think. The film wrapped 6 weeks later. John moved on to his next project, then the one after that. Tommy finished his contract, made his decision to leave, started his new life. The footage stayed in the archive. And on sets across Hollywood, whenever a young actor looked nervous or a studio observer got too close or someone needed a reminder about what mattered more than the schedule, someone would tell the story. The details would shift, the names might change, but the core held steady. That morning on stage 7, that moment in the lights. Those 4 words nobody can quite remember, but everybody knows were said. And if you want to hear what John Wayne did the night a different kind of letter showed up at his hotel, the one that changed how he looked at every Western he made after 1960, tell me in the comments.